In the age of smartphones, every message has a timestamp. Every call has a record. Every deleted text leaves a ghost. And somewhere inside the story of Joseph and Kendra Duggar, there is a communication that was never meant to survive. But it did. Today, we are not analyzing feelings. We are not reacting to Instagram posts or reading body language in family photos. Today, we are following data. Because data does not perform for cameras. Data does not smile on cue or post a carefully filtered picture with a Bible verse in the caption. Data just tells the truth. If that sounds like the kind of video you have been waiting for, you are in the right place. Hit that like button right now and subscribe to Jenny Exposes, because this channel is where the Duggar story gets treated like what it actually is, a case study. Not entertainment, a case study. Now, before we get into the communication itself, we have to build the foundation. Because if you walk into this story without context, you will miss exactly what makes this piece of evidence so significant. And I refuse to let that happen to my audience. Let's start with something that researchers, psychologists, and legal professionals have documented extensively across decades of relationship studies. In high-control relationship environments, communication is one of the very first things that gets managed. Not eventually, not later when things get bad. First, from the beginning, who you call, who you text, what apps are on your phone, what accounts you have access to, what email address belongs to you alone versus one that someone else can access. These are not dramatic, cinematic control tactics. They are quiet, structural ones. And that is precisely what makes them so effective and so hard to identify from the outside. This is not a dramatic accusation. This is a pattern that has been documented in academic research, in court records across the country, and in the testimonies of people who have lived inside systems exactly like this one. When you understand that framework, you stop asking why someone didn't just leave or why someone didn't just reach out for help. You start asking a much more intelligent question. You start asking, what did reaching out even look like for this person? What channels did they have access to? Who could they talk to? And more importantly, who was listening to those conversations? In a world where every single Duggar public appearance was coordinated, curated, scripted, and filtered, what happened to Kendra's private communications? That is the question at the center of everything today. Let's talk about Kendra's publicly observable digital behavior, because this is where the forensic angle becomes genuinely fascinating. Kendra Caldwell entered the Duggar world young, very young, and from the moment she became part of that family's public narrative, her digital presence followed a very specific pattern. Her social media was consistent, filtered, and on-brand. Positive captions, family-first messaging, scripturally adjacent content, regular posting intervals that suggested either a very disciplined personal habit or, more realistically, some level of coordination around timing and content. The platforms she used were the ones the broader Duggar family ecosystem used, the ones that were visible, the ones that were public. What is interesting is not what she posted. What is interesting is what she did not post. There were no platforms that existed outside the shared ecosystem, no accounts that appeared to be hers alone, operating independently, connecting her to a world outside the immediate family structure. For a young woman in her 20s navigating one of the most scrutinized families in the history of American reality television, the absence of any private digital footprint is itself a data point. Now, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But in digital forensics, a pattern that is too clean is its own kind of signal. When someone's entire digital life exists neatly within a single ecosystem, with no deviation, no experiment, no outside connection that is entirely their own, that tells you something about the environment they are operating in. So here is where it gets interesting. Here is where the timeline starts to crack. There is a theory in behavioral analysis that goes like this. When someone in a controlled environment gains access to a private communication channel, truly private, one that exists outside the system, their public digital behavior changes. Not dramatically. There is no sudden announcement, no obvious shift that everyone notices, just a slight, subtle deviation from the established baseline. A change in posting frequency, a new platform that appears quietly, a period of digital silence followed by a reemergence where the content feels just slightly different. The tone shifts by a few degrees. The language becomes a little less scripted. The timing becomes a little less predictable. If you know what the baseline looks like, you can see the deviation. And anyone who has been following this story long enough has had the opportunity to observe Kendra's baseline over years. The theory is straightforward. At some point in the timeline of this marriage, Kendra's digital behavior shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. And when you place that shift against what we know about the broader timeline of events, the question it raises is almost impossible to ignore. What changed? What did she gain access to that she did not have before? And who, outside the immediate family system, did she start talking to? Here is the layer underneath all of that data. And this is the part that I need you to sit with for a moment, because this is where it stops being forensic and starts being human. The particular suffering of communication control is that it removes the most fundamental human need that exists. Not food, not shelter, the need to be witnessed, to be able to say, to even one person who exists outside the walls of your situation, this is what is happening to me. Not to be fixed, not to be rescued immediately, just to be heard by someone who is not part of the system that surrounds you. Think about what that absence costs a person psychologically. Every experience you have, every moment that is hard, every fear that rises up, you carry it alone. You cannot process it with someone safe. You cannot have it reflected back to you by a trusted outside voice. You internalize it. You accumulate it. And over time, the weight of all that unexpressed private experience becomes one of the heaviest psychological burdens a person can carry. The research on this is extensive and consistent. Isolation from outside communication is not just a control tactic. It is a psychological compression mechanism. It keeps the person inside the system from ever being able to build an accurate picture of their own reality, because they have no external mirror. No one outside the system says what you are describing is not normal. What you are describing is not okay. And so the theory that follows from all of this is this. At some point, Kendra found a channel, some form of private communication that existed outside the curated, visible, shared digital ecosystem. Maybe it was a platform no one was monitoring. Maybe it was an account connected to an email address that was hers alone. Maybe it was a phone. The form matters less than what it represents, because whatever form it took, it became the most important communication channel of her life. It became the place where she could finally say out loud, in writing, with a timestamp, what was actually happening. And here is the theory that changes everything. Here is the one that I keep coming back to, the one that reframes the entire origin of the legal proceedings we have been tracking. What if the case did not start with a confrontation? What if it did not start with a dramatic moment or a breaking point that happened face-to-face? What if the legal process that is now playing out was triggered not by a scene, but by a message? In high-control relationship environments, researchers and legal professionals have documented a consistent pattern. The transition from private tension to public legal conflict is frequently catalyzed not by behavior, but by discovery. Specifically, the discovery that the person inside the system has been communicating privately with someone outside of it. When that discovery happens, something shifts. The unspoken agreement that holds the private dynamic in place, the one where everything stays internal, where the image is maintained, where nothing reaches the outside, that agreement is suddenly broken, and the system responds. The theory is this: somewhere in the timeline of this case, a communication was discovered. A text, an email, a call log, a message in an app, something that Kendra sent or received that revealed she had been building an independent support network outside the immediate family structure. And the discovery of that communication, the proof that she had found a voice that existed outside the system, is what transformed this story from a private family matter into a legal proceeding. The case did not begin in a courtroom. If this theory is correct, it began the moment someone read a message they were never supposed to read. Now I want to do something that I always try to do on this channel, which is to be transparent about the line between documented reality and analytical theory. Everything I have walked you through in terms of the research on communication control in high-control relationships, that is documented. That is the work of psychologists, sociologists, and legal professionals across decades of study. The pattern is real. The mechanism is real. The psychological cost is real. The application of that framework to Kendra's specific situation, the theory about when her digital behavior shifted, the theory about what triggered the legal proceedings, is analytical interpretation built on publicly observable information and established behavioral frameworks. It is not speculation for the sake of drama. It is the process of taking documented patterns and asking whether they are visible in a specific case. I am not telling you I have access to private court documents. I am not telling you I have seen the communication in question. What I am telling you is that the framework for understanding why such a communication would be significant and what its discovery could have set in motion is entirely grounded in documented research. And I think that framework deserves to be part of this conversation. Because the audience that has been following this series is not looking for drama. They are looking for the most accurate picture of what may actually be happening. And this theory, built on this framework, brings us closer to that picture than almost anything else we have examined. What does it mean when a private communication enters a legal proceeding? We will get into that in the second part of this video, and it is where this entire theory lands with its full weight. Because the transformation from private voice to public record is simultaneously the most vulnerable and the most powerful moment in Kendra's story. The words she wrote when she believed no one was watching may become the most important testimony in this entire case. Stay with me. Part 2 is where it all comes together. We left off with a question. What happens when a private communication enters a legal proceeding? And I want to answer that question carefully, because the answer is more layered than most people realize, and it matters enormously to understanding where this case is headed and what it means for Kendra specifically. When a private communication, a text, an email, a message in an app, a call log, any form of written or recorded private exchange enters a family court proceeding, it undergoes a transformation that is almost philosophical in its significance. Something that was written in a moment of private truth, in the middle of the night maybe, on a device that felt safe, to a person who felt trusted, that thing becomes a legal artifact. It gets an exhibit number. It gets read by attorneys. It gets evaluated by a judge, and depending on the nature of the proceeding, it may eventually become part of a public record that anyone can access. For someone who spent a significant period of their life without any private voice at all, that transformation is staggering. Think about the psychological weight of it. The words you wrote when you were most alone, most unguarded, most honest, those words are now the most powerful thing in the room. They cannot be reframed by someone else's version of events. They cannot be softened by a carefully coordinated public statement. They exist exactly as they were written, with the timestamp intact, with the context intact, with the emotional register of whoever was writing them at the exact moment they wrote them. In a legal environment where so much of the competing narrative has been shaped by public image management, by years of coordinated media presence, by a family infrastructure built specifically around controlling the story that the outside world receives, raw, private, time-stamped communications represent something that infrastructure has almost no answer for. You cannot spin a text message. You cannot curate a call log. You cannot apply a filter to an email written at 2 in the morning when someone was scared and reaching out to the only person they trusted. That is why this piece of evidence, if it exists in the form this theory suggests, is not just significant, it is potentially decisive. Let me walk you through a scenario. And I want to be absolutely clear, this is a speculative dramatization built on the documented frameworks we have been discussing throughout this series. This is not a transcript of actual court proceedings. This is what the introduction of such evidence could look like, based on how digital evidence is handled in family court cases across the country. I am labeling this clearly because I respect your intelligence, and I will never blur the line between documented fact and analytical theory on this channel. So, the scenario. Imagine a courtroom. Family court proceedings, by their nature, are more contained than criminal trials, less theatrical. But the introduction of digital evidence carries its own kind of weight because everyone in the room understands immediately what it means. Private communications are the closest thing that exists to unmediated truth in a legal proceeding. And the moment they appear as an exhibit, the entire energy of the room shifts. Kendra's attorney stands and addresses the court. Your Honor, I would like to introduce into evidence a series of communications spanning approximately 14 months. These communications were sent and received on a device belonging to my client, on an account registered solely in her name during the period covered by this proceeding. The opposing counsel is on their feet immediately. Objection! Those communications were obtained from a private device and have not been properly authenticated. Kendra's attorney does not flinch. The device belongs to my client, Your Honor. The account belongs to my client. The communications on that account represent the only unfiltered, uncoordinated record of my client's lived experience during the period in question. Every other record from this period was either produced for public consumption, coordinated through shared family accounts, or managed through channels that my client did not control independently. The judge leans forward slightly. Counsel, what specifically do these communications document? And here is the answer that changes the entire atmosphere of the room. Your Honor, these communications document a woman who is trying to find her way out, one message at a time, over 14 months. While presenting to the entire world and to everyone around her the appearance of being perfectly fine. The room is quiet for a moment. Not dramatically quiet, just the particular quiet of a space where something true has just been said out loud. Kendra sits at the table, and for just a second, she closes her eyes, because she remembers writing every single one of those messages. She remembers the specific nights, the specific fears, the specific moments when she reached for that private channel, because it was the only place where she could say what was actually happening without the words being managed, softened, or redirected before they reached anyone who might actually help. Those messages were her most private self, and now they are Exhibit J. And for the first time in a very long time, they are working for her. Now let's zoom out from the courtroom scenario and back to the analytical layer, because I want to talk about something that this theory reveals about the broader structure of this case that I think has not been sufficiently examined anywhere else. The standard narrative around cases like this one tends to follow a predictable arc. There is a breaking point. There is a confrontation. There is a dramatic moment where everything becomes visible at once, and the private situation becomes a public one. That narrative is satisfying because it follows a story structure we recognize. It has a clear before and after, a single moment where everything changes. But that is not how these situations actually tend to work in reality. And it is not, based on everything the documented research tells us, how this situation likely worked either. What the research consistently shows is that the transition from private suffering to public legal action in high-control relationship environments is almost never a single moment. It is a process. It is a series of small accumulations, a communication that gets sent, a response that arrives back, a trusted person outside the system who starts building a picture, an attorney who gets a call, a document that gets filed, and then, at some point along that chain, a discovery. The moment when someone inside the system realizes that the person they believed was fully contained has actually been building something outside of it. That discovery is the actual breaking point, not a confrontation, not a dramatic scene. The discovery that a private voice exists, that a communication was happening, that there is a record. And what makes that discovery so significant legally, psychologically, structurally, is that it reveals something about the power dynamic that the high-control environment was specifically designed to prevent from being revealed. That the person inside the system is not as isolated as the system required them to be, that they found a door, that they used it, that there are 14 months of time-stamped evidence that they used it. That is the moment the entire architecture of the controlled environment begins to crack. Because the one thing a control structure cannot survive is the proof that it failed to control. I want to talk about Kendra as a person for a moment, not as a subject of analysis, not as a figure in a theory, as a person. Because I think one of the things that gets lost in the way these cases get discussed on this channel, on other channels, in comment sections across the internet, is the specific kind of courage that the thing we are theorizing about actually required. Finding a private communication channel when you exist inside a structure that monitors and manages your communication is not a passive act. It is not something that just happens to you. It requires a decision. It requires a level of clarity about your own situation that is genuinely hard to achieve when you have been inside a closed system for long enough that the system's version of reality has started to feel like the only version. It requires the ability to recognize, even partially, even imperfectly, that what you are experiencing is something that a person outside your situation would recognize as not okay. And then it requires you to reach, to find a channel, to use it over and over again for 14 months while maintaining the external appearance that everything is fine, while posting the filtered photos, while attending the coordinated appearances, while doing everything the visible, public version of your life required, and simultaneously, in private, building the record that would eventually become the most powerful documentation of your actual experience. That is not a small thing. I want to say that clearly and without qualification. That is an enormous thing, and the courage it represents deserves to be named, even in the context of a theoretical framework, because the theory is built on the understanding that real human beings with real psychological resources, even limited ones, make real decisions that change the trajectory of their lives. Kendra, if the theory is accurate, made one of those decisions, and she made it quietly, consistently, and privately over a period of 14 months with no guarantee that it would ever matter. It may be about to matter more than anything else in this case. Let me bring in the wider context here because I think it is important to understand that what we are discussing with Kendra is not an isolated phenomenon. Digital communications have become the most significant category of evidence in family court proceedings over the last decade. Legal professionals across the country have documented this shift consistently. The stories people tell in what they believe are private digital spaces, the texts sent at midnight, the emails drafted over days and never intended to be seen by anyone except the recipient, the messages in apps they believed were encrypted or temporary or somehow protected. Those communications are now entering courtrooms at a rate that would have seemed almost impossible to predict 15 years ago. And what legal professionals consistently say about this category of evidence is that it carries a particular weight that other forms of testimony simply cannot replicate. Because it is contemporaneous, it was written in the moment, not reconstructed from memory months or years later, not filtered through the psychological process of preparing testimony, just the raw, real-time record of what a person was experiencing and thinking and feeling at a specific moment in time. When you place that kind of evidence against testimony that has been prepared, coordinated, and delivered through the filter of legal strategy and image management, the contemporaneous private communication almost always wins. Not because courts are sentimental about private suffering, but because courts are interested in truth. And a message written at 2 in the morning to the only person you trusted is almost by definition closer to the truth than anything prepared for public consumption. That is the legal reality that surrounds this theory. And it is the reason that, if the communication we are discussing exists in the form this theory suggests, its introduction into this proceeding could shift the entire balance of the case. There is one more thing I want to say before we get to where you come in, and it is about what this theory means for the broader narrative around the Duggar family and the way that narrative has been managed for the last 2 decades. The Duggar family built one of the most sophisticated personal brand operations in the history of American reality television. 19 Kids and Counting was not just a show. It was a long-form image management project. It created a specific version of this family, joyful, faithful, united, abundant, and it delivered that version to an audience of millions, weekly, for years. And even after the show ended, the infrastructure of that image management continued, through social media, through public appearances, through the coordinated presence of family members who understood, consciously or not, that the brand required maintenance. What private communications represent, in the context of that decades-long image management project, is the exact opposite of the brand. They are the unmanaged version, the unfiltered version, the version that existed behind every coordinated appearance and every carefully captioned family photo. And if those communications enter public record not as allegations, not as claims made by one party against another, but as time-stamped documents written by Kendra herself, in her own words, at moments when she had no reason to perform for anyone, they represent something the Duggar family image infrastructure has never had to face before. Its own evidence. Not what critics said, not what outsiders observed. What someone on the inside wrote down, privately, over 14 months, because she needed to say it to someone, and could not say it anywhere else. Here is where you come in. And I mean this seriously, because this community, the people who have been watching this series from the beginning, have built something genuinely remarkable in the comment section of this channel. Digital forensics is now one of the most consequential tools available in family court proceedings. The way digital evidence gets introduced, authenticated, and interpreted has changed the outcome of cases at every level of the family court system. And the framework we have built across this series, the understanding of how communication control works, what the digital behavioral baseline looks like, what a deviation from that baseline signals, and what the legal weight of contemporaneous private communications actually is, that framework is more complete here, in this community, than almost anywhere else on the internet. So here's what I want to know from you. Based on everything we have covered across this entire series, what do you believe the most important communication in this case contains? Not specifics, not names, not anything that crosses into territory we do not need to cross. Just the nature of it. Is it a cry for help written in a moment of desperation? Is it a plan, documented incrementally over months, that shows deliberate and clear-headed decision-making? Is it a record of a contemporaneous account of specific experiences, written specifically because Kendra understood, even then, that documentation might matter someday? Drop your theory in the comments below. Because this comment section has been the most analytically rigorous space for examining this case anywhere on the internet. And the picture that this community has assembled, piece by piece, across 13 videos, is closer to the truth of what is happening than anything being produced anywhere else. I also want to say something directly to anyone watching this who recognizes something in what we have been discussing today. Not the Duggar specifics, the framework, the communication control, the isolation, the weight of carrying unexpressed private experience with no outside mirror. The specific fear of reaching for a private channel and not knowing whether it is safe. If any part of what we discussed today resonated with something in your own life, I want you to hear this clearly. The research is consistent, the legal framework exists, and the pathway out, even from inside a very controlled environment, has been found by people who were in situations that felt completely sealed. You are not as alone as the system around you needs you to believe you are. That is not a dramatic statement. That is just what the research shows, over and over again. Subscribe to Jenny Exposes right now if you are not already subscribed. Because when the communications we have been theorizing about today enter public record, and based on the trajectory of this case, that moment may be closer than anyone realizes, you are going to want 13 videos of context already in your understanding. You are going to want to know the framework, the baseline, the deviation, the legal weight of contemporaneous digital evidence, all of it, already built, already in your head. Hit the like button on this video, not because the algorithm needs it, although it does, but because if this analysis is reaching you, it means the algorithm surfaced it for a reason, and liking it tells the algorithm to surface it for the next person who needs this framework to understand what they are watching unfold. Share this video with your most analytical friend, the one who thinks in timelines, the one who builds evidence structures in their head before they open their mouth. The one who, when you told them about this series, immediately asked what the legal mechanism was. That person needs to be in this comment section. And drop your theory below. What did the message say? What was the nature of it? What do you believe Kendra wrote in private over 14 months that became the most important documentation of this case? Because every text has a timestamp. Every call has a record. Every deleted message leaves a ghost. And somewhere in this case, a communication survived that was never supposed to. And when it becomes part of the public record, this community will be the most prepared audience on the internet to understand exactly what it means. I will see you in the next video. Jenny Exposes. We follow the data.